My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Biran Sankaran, and Guru Biranyo, fellow Jnanis. Today I'm going to continue Mahan's chapter 16, part 4. In part 3, I covered how, human activities, which is what I call Anthropocene, is having an impact on the Earth system. Anthropocene is actually the phenomena where, there are many things that impact the Earth system. Some are natural, but one of the major impact to the Earth system is human activity. And majority of human activity has an adverse impact on the environment, on the planet, and that is now having an impact on the quality of life. And I spoke about it. And in the last satsang, I spoke about how one can break the trade-off between economic development and planetary health. And we are moving on the wrong curve. The economic development is taking place at the expense of nature. And in the last satsang, I spoke about how do we enhance economic development while still taking into consideration all the environmental consideration and ensuring that the health of the planet actually helps us reinforce and give us better economic value, and to ensure that the environment is contributing to human development, not only for people today, but for the future generation. So that requires a complete mindset on how we look at economics from a more sustainable perspective. Today, I'll link between spirituality and sustainable development. This is really important. Many people are very religious and very spiritual, but sometimes they don't take into consideration that nature itself is divine. And, nature itself needs to be, when we are nature-centric, we are actually aligned to some of the spiritual values. So I want to link between spirituality and sustainable development, and how Mahan and great saints show that as we become more and more respectful, as we become more and more nature-centric, we are actually becoming more and more spiritual and more enlightened. So I want to make that link today in this discussion as how Mahan has shown in the I God philosophy. So here I want to bring this great, scholar by the name of Nasser. He says that in spite of all the economic developments that we have had, we actually have not, all the scientific developments, we have not really linked all our scientific pursuit to understanding nature. And he says that although science is legitimate in itself, the role and the function of science and its application have become illegitimate and even dangerous because lack of higher form of knowledge into which science could be integrated, and the destruction of the sacred spiritual value of nature. So we have actually developed rapidly over the last 300 to 400 years with scientific developments, new discoveries. But what Nasser is saying here is that while we have pursued scientific knowledge, we have pursued it to ensure that we use this knowledge to exploit nature in the best possible way and get better return on investment without considering the ramification to nature. And he makes it very clear that, actually science and technology is supposed to help us understand nature and harness the power of nature in a sustainable way. And that's not what we have done since, since the Industrial Revolution. So he says that there's a need for science to go back to see its core essence of how science, part of the scientific pursuit, is actually a spiritual pursuit, and how we unlock the value of nature. So here Nasser speaks about that important link that science needs to play. Even Mahan also says, scientific pursuit is very important, but it has to be very nature-centric. And here, Nasser goes on to explain that the destruction of the equilibrium between man and nature is a result of humankind's further conquest and dominion of nature. We want to dominate nature. We want to exploit nature. And this is the problem. And, we have to harness the power of nature. We have to be able to be aligned to nature. And what is really interesting is that nature supports everything that we need as a species. As a matter of fact, we need nature more than nature needs us. Actually, nature doesn't need us. If human beings are not on earth, nature will still thrive. But if nature is not there, or if nature is in a bad shape, human beings will not be able to live, happily, or the quality of life will diminish significantly. So we see that nature is core to our existence, and this is what Nasir and Mahan and other great scholars and saints are saying. How do we link it back? So again, he says that the challenges of society today can be traced back to the development model that is centered on the dominion of nature, exploitation of nature, dominating nature. So this is something that we want to keep in mind. Gandhi also says the same thing too. A lot of our economic development is driven by profit maximization. And in that context, we see that, what Gandhi is saying here is that actually nature provides for everyone. It can meet the needs of everybody, but it cannot meet the needs or the greed of everyone. So here he says very beautifully that earths provide enough to satisfy every man's need, but not every man's greed. So this whole idea of profit maximization in many of the economic models need to transition towards purpose maximization. And also this whole idea of return on investment, what I put in, what I get. So you want to invest and maximize your outcome. That too has a destructive component in it. There's a big shift towards return on investment to return on values. And I'll speak about that a little bit more. And this is something that Mahan talks about, of mindset and the values that we need to incorporate in our pursuit. Whether it's economic pursuit or any other, lifestyle, we need to be able to incorporate that spiritual values, the divine values, the spiritual compass and the moral compass to guide us, to educate us, and keep us aware that nature is core to our existence. So here, Gandhi's quote is very apt. So human beings realize that what we do is having an impact. It's got an impact on the environment. It's got an impact on people's lives. It's impact on many fronts. And over the last couple of decades, the United Nations realized that in spite of all the developments, the gap between the rich and the poor have been expanding. The exploitation has increased. Nature has suffered. So they've incorporated all this to ensure that we develop in a sustainable way. And it started off with the Millennium Development Goals that identify the challenges that society is experiencing. The inequalities, the inequities, the degradation of the environment, and a whole range of things. So they incorporated the Millennium Development Goals, so they brought out the Sustainable Development Goals, the goals up to 2030, that what humanity should achieve. And here are the 17 goals, no poverty, reducing hunger. There are many, millions of people, in spite of abundance of food, places where people throw food, there are millions of people that are starving, So this is a Sustainable Development Goal 2. Third one is good health and well-being, quality of education. Education is very important for people to understand, who they are, understand nature and its resources, and how we use those education to improve our quality of life. The fifth one is gender equality. There's a lot of discrimination of women, in many societies, and women play a key role. And you see that the women population is almost half our human race, and yet, in many parts of the world, women are suppressed, are not provided, access to education, healthcare, and a whole range of other things. So gender equality is very important. The other aspect is clean water and sanitation. Many parts of the world don't have clean water and sanitation. Many of the water is contaminated, and many people die of various waterborne diseases. Affordable and clean energy. We are using a lot of fossil fuels that are causing a lot of CO2 and other emissions that's causing the greenhouse gases. and also, climate change. So how do we transition towards more eco-friendly energy? The eighth development goal is about decent work and economic growth. As I know, in the previous satsang, we showed that how economic growth can have an impact on environment. We also have a lot of jobs that are created but exploit people. Amazing how in the 21st century we still have slavery, right? People are being exploited, in terms of the kind of jobs that they do with very little resources, and some of them suffer. So, part of the Sustainable Development Goal 8 is to ensure that there's decent work, there's decent remuneration, so that, when people have decent income, they spend, that stimulates economic growth. So there's a good link between quality jobs and economic growth. The other aspect of the Sustainable Development Goals is about actually ensuring our industries are vibrant, thriving, able to create good jobs, are innovative. And here again, Mahan speaks about how we need to nurture productive industries, invest into innovation, invest into infrastructure, so that our industries are eco-friendly, nature-centric, creating high-income jobs. Sustainable Development 10 is about reducing inequalities. We see, across the globe, in many countries, you see inequalities between rich and the poor. The inequalities are based on gender, race, ethnicity. In some countries, we see that, certain groups suffer or prosecuted or suppressed. So again, part of this, sustainable development goals is how do we reduce income and opportunity inequalities for various segments of the population. Sustainable Development Goal 11 is actually about, the population is growing significantly. We will have close to, 7 billion, we have 7 billion people, and that's growing. How do we ensure our cities can provide, good services, for the increasing population? How do we create thriving communities, vibrant communities, healthy communities? And this is a major challenge in many countries where you see urban poor and urban ghettos forming, and the conditions in the urban areas are really, really bad. The 12th sustainable goal is actually about responsible consumption and production. We see that, consumer consumption is very important for economic development, but we also see that it puts a lot of pressure on the resources of the earth. The more we buy, the more we need to use up resources from the earth. So how do we consume responsibly and produce responsibly so that we don't overburden or overuse Earth's resources, whether it is minerals or, vegetations or plantations or fishery, how do we not over-harvest and ensure that they have sustainable resources for not just the current population, but future population, increasing population. The 13th sustainable goal is climate action. As I mentioned earlier, the climate, has had a major impact since the Industrial Revolution. The temperature has gone up significantly, and that is having an impact on the ice caps in the northern and the southern poles. As the ice caps melt, we see that the sea levels are going to increase. And as the sea levels increase, a lot of the coastal communities and islands will go underwater. Millions of people, if not billions, will suffer, lose their homes, lose their economic, their jobs and so on. So again, I think it's the scientists say that the earth is in a very difficult crossroads. We need to change to our behavior, our consumption patterns, transition from fossil fuels to more renewable energy to address the climate change issues. Life below water, again, as I mentioned in the previous satsang, where we are starting to see over-harvesting, we are seeing that contamination and pollution is impacting, fish and other species. And we are starting to also see that, many of the contaminants that end up in the fish are also ending up, or on the seafood, is ending up in human beings. So again, if we don't look after our oceans, it will have a major impact on us. The 15th Sustainable Development Goal is life on land. And this is our forests and our jungles and all the species that depend on this, habitat. The more we use it for industrial and other activities, and as we, you know, uh, harvest and use up the natural forest, we are going to disrupt the natural habitat. Many species are going to go extinct. So again, and when these species go extinct, we are part of that supply chain, we are part of that ecosystem, it'll eventually impact human life itself. So think of this way. Can you imagine if the bees become extinct? And if the bees become extinct, we eventually will see that a pollination of flowers will not take place. Pollination of trees will not take place. When that happens, we see that we will not get beautiful flowers, crops. So it directly impacts us. So there's a strong symbiotic relationship between us, nature, the ocean, and all the species. When we disrupt that, that has a major impact. Sustainable Development Goal 16 is actually about peace, justice, and strong institution. We need to have strong institutions, legal architecture, judiciary, institutions that will look after the interests of everyone, particularly the disadvantaged, so that it prevents exploitation and so on. Without that, we see that it's hard to attain peace and in society. Eventually, society will rebel when they feel that they are the you know their quality of life is compromised. So we see the Sustainable Development Goal 16 is crucial in ensuring that all the other goals are met, particularly addressing issues of inequities, inequalities, and providing everyone access to quality education, healthcare services, and so on, so that people can be empowered to look to look after their own have the tools to look after themselves and overcome poverty and hunger and a whole range of other things. We also need institutions that look after nature, making sure that people don't contaminate the environment, contaminate our waterways, and also institutions that make sure that we use the resources responsibly. So SDG 16 is very important to ensure that the enabling environment is conducive for all the other SDGs to meet its goal. And the last SDG is about partnership. It's about collaboration. It's about cooperation. Everyone needs to work together, countries, the global community, industries working with government, with community organization, and the Rakyat itself, need to come together in partnership, in collaboration, have formed collaborative and knowledge networks to look at the grand challenges and find collective solutions to address some of these challenges here. Many of those challenges are transboundary. Many of the challenges, impact one another. No one person or one institution or one country can solve this problem. It is a global challenge, and this requires partnership from every segment of the population. And this is what binds this SDG 17, binds all the other 16 SDGs to, without the strong cooperation, achieving this sustainable development goals is going to be a challenge. So we see that part of this UN Sustainable Development Goal is essentially transitioning from the profit maximization, return on investment kind of concept and exploitation of nature and exploitation of people towards a more sustainable, more nature-centric approach to take into consideration the needs of everyone, from nature right up to the last, least, and lost people, that society have. These are the segments of population that are disadvantaged, that need that boost and the support to, improve their quality of life. And that's what spiritual life is so the ability to, you know, have a universal outlook to addressing some of these grand challenges. And this is what Nasser and Mahan and other great saints and sages and scholars have been talking about, having a more wholesome approach of development. So we see that we spoke about the man-made disasters from haze right up to, pollution and forest fires and so on, that is continuously disrupting our way of life. And how do we transition that? And this is where the mindset change is so important. And here is, this mindset. It's the values that we have. And this is part of the spiritual values. At the core, we have the 17 SDG. It's actually a mindset change of how we address these challenges. And these values are tied to what I call 8R. And this is something that we've been working on. And it's about these 8 pillars of, respect, rethinking. Now, go through one by one. What does it mean? And these are all spiritual values you'll see in all the spiritual books spoken by many masters, including Mahan. And I want to kind of explain each one of them. So what does that mean? Respect means we've got to respect human rights, animal rights, biodiversity, and the health of the planet. And that's what it means being spiritual. The other aspect is rethinking. How do we rethink the use of the ecosystem resources? I mean, the resources that we have, with strategies put in. So we need to put in place strategies to get the best return on value, not return on investment or profit maximum. Whatever we do, how can we harness nature, harness others that are dependent on nature, so that we use the resources today for the benefit of society and for future generation. Reduction, how do we reduce our activities, without compromising our quality of life? Reusing many of those things in the ecosystem. Sometimes, we use things and we throw it away. How do we reuse it? How do we recycle waste materials, such that we can use it? The circular economic development model, right? How do we, rechannel some of our waste into fertilizers and other things? How do we restore the ecosystems that have been degraded by, or had, gone through adverse impact due to human activities? How do we improve the quality of this, various ecosystems? How do we repurpose some of the resources so that we can use it for multiple use? This is important because we want to make sure that, we don't continuously, human needs are expanding. How do we use these resources in multiple ways so that we don't put pressure in demanding for more resources to meet all this multitude of needs? And finally, how do we revitalize our ecosystem? How do we invest in them, preserve them, harness them, so that not only we benefit, but all the other species that are dependent on the environment also thrive? So when nature thrives, all species in nature thrive, and so do we. So this is the 8R philosophy that we've incorporated in many of our development framework. So we see that, this value system, and actually it's part of the spiritual values. It's very interesting, that we spend a lot of time with religious activities and spiritual activities, but yet we harm the environment, not realizing the environment itself is divinity and God, right? So if we know this, then we see that whatever religious practice or spiritual practice will give the environment the preeminent role, because nature is actually a manifestation of God itself. So here it is that if you read the spiritual scriptures, including Mahan's work, it says that when nature is in harmony, we all resonate in harmony. And this is where we've got to go back to the drawing board of, not just meeting our material desires, but really understanding our spiritual identity. Knowing that the spirit is permeated in nature and embedding that nature-centric values into our spiritual pursuit, into all our other pursuits. So this is what we say that, what I call an infinity model, where, you know, what's nature and understanding nature. When we incorporate, we become nature centric, and all our activities, our internal activities, our emotional state, our economic needs, and all our material needs are aligned to that of nature. So there's this, yin and yang, that we incorporate nature within ourselves through introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation, and our mindset, intellect, and our senses become more refined in incorporating the nature-centric values in our thought processes, in our speeches, and also in our actions. So this is where we see that, we become more and more one with nature. And this is what is spoken about in all the religious and spiritual values. And this is what Nasir and Mahan and other great saints have saying. We need to really use science, technology to be able to incorporate into all our activities, starting with our spiritual activities. So here, it's a beautiful quote, that says that ecology and spirituality are fundamentally connected, because deep ecological awareness ultimately is deep spiritual awareness. Exactly like, Mahan says that, ni na nane ni nium nanum nane nan. You and I are the same, and nature and I are the same, because ultimately, I emerge, we all emerge from nature. A part of nature's DNA, a wholesome part of nature's DNA is part of our DNA. So somehow we tend to forget that. And here we have great saints that remind us that we are one, hence we have to have respect and reverence for nature. And you see that when we do that, nature essentially helps us to grow in a sustainable way. The other, important quote, I really like this quote that says that our purpose here on earth to manifest the very nature of our spirit, which is touched by the Spirit of God. So this is, again, Swamiji's philosophy of I God, and all the other vakyas, Aham Brahmasmi. So we sometimes say this, but it's not resonating in our mind. It's not resonating in our thoughts. It's not resonating in our actions. So here, these great saints say that, the Aham Brahmasmi, or I God, or, the kingdom of God is within me. Whatever we say, that it has to translate into the thoughts that we generate, the speeches that we have, we give out in an inspirational way, and the actions that we undertake. Sandosham.